Let's return to the Moonlands and delve into how to play Magi-Nation. This has been one of my favorite collectible card games of all time, and it's getting a reprinting in the near future, so I want to make some content for it to throw it out there and find some more Magi to join the Moonlands. We're going to start off this how to play guide with a breakdown of the 4 different types of cards. We have Magi, creatures, relics, and spells. All cards have a number in the top left corner that represent that card's energy. Now, energy will mean slightly different things depending on the type of card. So for Magi, their energy represents their mana and their life points. It's how they play other cards and how you lose the game. They also have an energize rate. This is how much energy they gain every turn. So they lose energy by playing cards and taking damage, but they gain energy through their energize. Magi also have a list of starting cards that you're allowed to search your discard pile or your deck for when the Magi comes into play. And then finally, Magi, like most cards, have either effects or powers or both. Effects and powers are what the cards actually do. Effects are ongoing and they activate any time that the trigger happens, so they can happen over and over and over. But powers can only be activated once per turn on your turn, and they usually have a cost that is represented by a number inside of a tiny circle. If this number is on a creature, the creature will pay that much energy to activate the power. But if the cost is on a relic or a Magi, then the Magi will pay that energy cost in order to use that power. Next up, we have creatures. Now, creatures' energy number represents a bunch of stuff. It's their cost, their attack, their health, their energy reserves to use powers, all in one number. The number also represents the starting energy of that creature. So if we play a creature that has 3 energy in the top left corner, we have to pay 3 energy off of our Magi, and then we put 3 energy on the creature in the form of a dice. So the energy that's actually on the creature in the form of dice represents that creature's power, its energy reserves, and its health. When one creature attacks another, they subtract the amount of energy they have from the opposing creature's energy. So the blue one would deal 2 damage, and the purple one would deal 3 damage, which will leave the purple one at 1, but the blue one will have all of its energy removed. And when a creature no longer has energy, it no longer has any health, so it gets discarded. And when calculating damage or using powers, you always use the energy that's on the creature in the form of dice, not the energy that's printed on the card. So if we play this one for 4, we pay 4 energy off of our Magi, put 4 energy on it, and this one has a power that costs 2. So we can pay 2 energy off of this creature to activate its power. And its power will deal 3 damage or remove 3 energy from any creature that we want. So we can use its power, discard himself because that's what the card says to do, and then deal 3 damage to any other creature. And then since this creature no longer has energy, it gets discarded as well. And we'll talk about turn structure, deck building, and have an example game near the end of the video. But for now, let's continue on with relics and spells. So relics are similar to creatures in that when you play them, they stay in play. But relics basically just support your Magi by giving your Magi additional powers and effects. You also may have noticed that some text pops up on certain cards if I highlight them, and that is just because the software I'm using has included the card erratas. So times that they change the text of the card, that's just included in this version. But think of relics as equipment. They don't have their own energy because they don't have their own life force. They're just tools that your Magi uses to gain more powers and effects. So this one has a cost of 2 to activate its power, so we would pay 2 energy off of our Magi to then use that power. The energy number printed on relics and spells simply represents the cost to play those cards, because unlike creatures and Magi, they generally won't have energy placed on them. Now what makes spells different from the rest is that you play the spell, you pay its cost, you do what it says, and then you discard it. Whereas relics and creatures and Magi stay in play until they are destroyed. Now some cards will have an X, and the X is of course a variable that can be basically any number. But if the X is in the cost, as it generally is, you can't make the X a number that you can't afford. So I have 5 energy, So if I played this spell that cost X, I could pay up to 5. I could pay 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but I couldn't pay 6 because I don't have 6 energy. So the X is anything up to the amount of energy that you have. So in this case, I paid 5 for the X in the cost, which turns the X in the effect to 5. So this says discard X energy from the Magi, and since I paid 5, it says discard 5 energy from the Magi. Then after the spell is resolved, we discard it, because spells are just temporary. So just remember that whatever you pay into X is the number that X becomes. Now if a Magi no longer has energy on itself or energy on creatures that it has in play, that Magi is now defeated. So we toss that Magi over to the side, and the next Magi will come into play. When a new Magi comes into play, it gets its starting energy, and you get to search your discard pile and your deck for its starting cards. Plus it'll energize on the first turn that it comes in as well. So Magi come in swinging. They come in with tons of energy and brand new cards to help you push back the onslaught that just took out their friend. Now if a Magi is reduced to 0 energy, but it still has energy left on creatures that it controls, that Magi is still alive, because the energy on creatures is a part of the Magi. The energy is like their souls are entwined. So you have to get rid of all of the energy on the creatures and on the Magi for it to get defeated. And then once one player's Magi are all defeated, they lose the game. Now on to deck building, turn sequence, and an example of gameplay. So a deck consists of 3 Magi, and these Magi can be from different nations, although it will make it hard for you to balance regional restrictions if you don't have them be the same region. But you just need 3 Magi, and then a deck of at least 40 cards, with no more than 3 copies of any card in the deck. One other restriction when it comes to deck building is cards that say alternative actually count as their alternate, not as their own unique card. But we'll talk more about that near the end of the video. But once you've chosen your 3 Magi, you need to decide what order you want them to be played in. They will be played face down from top to bottom. So the card that's on top will be the first Magi that is put into play. Then once you and your opponent are ready to play, simply roll a dice or flip a coin to see who goes first. But note that whoever does go first will not energize on their very first turn. So in exchange for going first, your Magi will lose out on some energy. But at the start of any turn, including the first one, if you don't have a face-up Magi, you flip up the top card of your Magi stack, and that Magi is now in play. The Magi's energy in the top left is its starting energy, so this Magi starts with 12. Then we go and grab our starting cards. All of the cards printed after the word starting. We would first search our discard pile for those cards. Then if we didn't find them in the discard pile, we can search our deck for those cards. Just 1 copy of each of the cards listed. Now for this Magi, I only have 1 of its 3 starting cards in the deck. So I will get that card, and then anytime you search your deck, you will shuffle it. But on the very first turn, after you get your starting cards, you will then draw up to 5, until you have 5 cards in your hand. So since I only had 1 of my 3 starting cards, I would draw 4 more until I had 5. But if I had all 3 of my starting cards, then I would only draw 2. And you can't start with more than 5 starting cards. What you can do during a turn is broken down into 6 phases. First you energize, then you can play powers, relics, and spells, then attack, then play new creatures, then a second powers, relics, and spells phase, and finally you draw your cards for the turn. So the first thing you do on your turn is energize. But again, whoever goes first will skip their very first energize phase. But on all subsequent turns, all of your cards that say energize will gain that much energy at the start of your turn. Now even though this Magi won't energize because we're going first, the Magi has an effect that will add 5 energy to her if she has no creatures in play. And since we have no creatures in play, she gains that 5 energy. After you energize, you have a powers, relics, and spells phase, during which you can play powers, relics, and spells. However, I don't have any spells or relics, and I have no powers in play. So we're going to skip that and go to our attack phase, but I have no creatures in play, so I can't attack. And even if I did have a creature in play, there is nothing to attack, because as long as the Magi are face down, you can't target your opponent, because there's nothing there. And during your attack phase, you cannot use powers or play new cards. You can only attack. But then after we attack, we can then play new creatures. So during the new creatures phase, all you can do is play new creatures. You can't use spells or powers, and you can't attack. So we're going to play Wudge, which has a starting energy of 1. So we take 1 energy off of our Magi and add 1 energy to Wudge. And he has an effect that says when another creature is played, Wudge gains 1 energy. So effects can happen at any time. Effects can happen during the attack step or during the creature step. Any time that the effect triggers, the effect happens. Whereas powers can only be used during the powers, relics, and spells phase because you have to activate the power, where you don't have to activate an effect. Effects just happen. So as we play creatures, transferring energy off of our Magi onto the creature, the Wudge will steadily grow. Now you should pay for a creature, then place energy on it, then activate triggering effects like Wudge. But in casual games, you can be a little more loose, of course, as long as you still keep up with what is supposed to be happening. But just remember that the correct order is to pay the energy off of your Magi, then add energy to the creature equal to its starting energy, and then trigger effects that happen when that creature comes into play. But with that, my Magi doesn't have enough energy to play this creature, so we move to the second Powers, Relics, and Spells phase. But I have no relics and spells to play, and I have no power on any of my in-play cards. Even though I have a power on the card in my hand, you can only use powers that are printed on cards that are currently in play. Then the final step of every turn is the draw phase, during which we draw 2 cards and pass the turn to our opponent. And there is no limit to how many cards you can hold in your hand. So now it is my opponent's turn, and since they don't have a Magi face up when they start their turn, they will flip up their next Magi, place the starting energy of 14 on it, and go and grab their starting cards. And since I'm playing myself and it's a little awkward, plus this Magi will energize at the beginning of the turn anyway, and we don't have any start of turn triggers, I'm going to go ahead and add the energize rate of 7 to the Magi's energy for a total of 21. Now I'm going to go grab the starting cards. So most Magi have specific cards as their starting cards, but some of them, like this one, just say any Aroth relic, or some of them say any creature, and things like that. For this example, I'm going to grab 2 of the same relic, because I forgot to mention earlier that you cannot have 2 of the same relic in play. And this limit applies to any way that you could possibly obtain a relic. If you tried to steal a relic from your opponent, and you already had a copy of that relic in play, your stealing effect would fizzle and not do anything, because you can only have 1 copy of any relic in play at any given time. But after we grab our starting cards, we will then draw up to 5, so we now have 5 cards in our hand, and then we start our turn. We already energized, so now we're on our powers, relics, and spells phase. We're going to play this relic, and then use its power. You can play spells, relics, and use powers in any order during your powers, relics, and spells phase. But remember that you can only use each power printed on a card 1 single time per turn during one of your powers, relics, and spells phase. So since we've already used the power on this relic to manipulate the top of our deck, we cannot do it again this turn. Then I have no more powers, relics, and spells. We have no creatures that we could attack with, so we move on to the play new creatures phase, and we're just going to lay them all down. Now when you actually play, be sure to play 1 creature at a time. Don't just lay them all down like I just did and then pay for them later, but pay for a card, play that card, place its starting energy on that card, and then resolve any effects that happen when it comes into play. Not only because that's just the rules of the game, but also it's good etiquette. It gives your opponent a chance to react as things happen, rather than trying to muddle through and figure out what should be happening. For example, I totally forgot to energize Wudge every time a creature enters play. So that's a good example of not only is it up to you to remember what your cards do and when they do those things, but also it's up to you to give your opponent a chance to do things in the correct order. That's why following the rules of play is very important. But now it's purple's turn, starting off with the energize phase. But this time we have a creature that says if we have another creature in play, it gains energize 1. So this creature will energize 1 at the same time that our Magi energizes. And if somehow a creature gains multiple instances of energize, the largest one will preside. So if you have 2 energize 1s on the same creature, it won't energize 2. It'll just energize 1. But I have no powers, relics, or spells to use, so now it's time to attack. So all creatures can attack once per turn as long as they are in play at the start of your attack step. A creature can only attack a Magi if that Magi has no creatures in play. But aside from that, you get to pick who your creatures attack and in what order, but only one attack at a time. So this Chaos Gial is going to attack the Giant Whale, and the Gial has an effect that says if it attacks a creature, you will add 4 energy to it after the energy is removed. The Whale also has an effect, but it says if it attacks, and it's not attacking because it's being attacked. So we'll subtract the energy from each other, so the Whale will receive 6 damage and get discarded because it's out of energy, and then the Chaos Gial's effect will come into play. Because after it attacked, the energy was removed, so now it gains 4 energy. And the way that is worded is very important if it says before or after energy is removed. For example, if the Chaos Gial attacked this really big guy that has 8 energy, the Chaos Gial would die before his effect kicked in, since his effect specifically says after energy is removed, and a creature is immediately discarded as soon as it has no energy. And now that the Chaos Gial attacked, it cannot attack again during this attack phase, but we still have 3 creatures that can. However, this guy over here has an effect that says each time a creature you control is discarded from play, he gains 1 energy. And since the Giant Whale was discarded from play, he will gain that 1 energy. And so that's not good. I need to take care of him before I kill anyone else because we wouldn't want to make him bigger. So my little 4 energy guy is going to attack his 3 energy guy. So the purple one takes 3 damage and the blue one will get discarded. But blue still has a giant creature in play. However, this guy with the giant horn has a special effect called Borrow. Whenever Ugger attacks, you may move any amount of energy from one of your other creatures to Ugger before energy is removed. So since this one says before energy is removed, we can take the Chaos Gial's 5 energy and put it on this guy right here. The Chaos Gial will immediately get discarded because it is totally out of energy, but now we each have 8 energy. So we'll subtract 8 from each other, and we'll both be completely out of energy, so both of these creatures will get sent to the discard pile. And now that the blue Magi has no creatures in play, we can attack him directly with our final creature who has yet to attack. So the Wudge can attack the Magi directly, and when attacking Magi directly, the Magi deal no damage to the creature. So you just subtract the creature's energy from the Magi's energy. So the blue one will just lose 4, and the Wudge won't take any damage at all. Also, during your attack step, creatures do not have to attack if you do not want them to. But now I'm out of attacking creatures, so on to the play new creatures phase. We're going to spend 6 energy off of our Magi to play this guy at 6. And as this creature enters play, it will trigger the Wudge's effect to make him grow by 1. But now I'm out of energy, so I can't play any more creatures, and I have no powers, relics, and spells that I want to use, so I will end my turn and draw my 2 cards. And with that, it is now blue's turn. So they start off by energizing. Their energize rate is 7, so their Magi gains 7 energy. And now it is their first powers, relics, and spells phase. They'll go ahead and use the power on their relic to manipulate the top 2 cards of the deck. They have no creatures in play, so they can't attack. So now on to the play new creatures phase. Now, blue's looking pretty rough. They're running out of cards, they're running out of energy. So sometimes in these situations, it's best to just not play cards. Because if you play all your cards and they're going to get discarded anyway, then your next Magi won't have enough resources to actually push back the onslaught. However, this creature has an ability to draw 2 cards. So we are going to play this creature, paying 4 energy off of our Magi and placing 4 energy on it, That way we can draw some more cards before this Magi is defeated. So then in our second Powers, Relics, and Spells phase, we're going to activate his ability, paying 3 energy off of him because that's how much it costs, and then we're going to draw 2 cards from that ability. Now, if those cards were creatures, we wouldn't be able to play them because we're no longer in the play creatures phase. And that's when the phases become really important, is that you can only use Powers, Relics, and Spells during your Powers, Relics, and Spells phase, and you can only play creatures during your play creatures phase. But in this situation, blue knows that his Magi will be defeated on purple's turn, so it's best to just hoard the cards anyway. So even if he could play those creatures, he wouldn't want to, because your next Magi will come out with massive amounts of energy, so as long as it has cards to play, usually the counterattack will be really strong. But now it's purple's turn, so they start off by energizing all of their cards that have energized, so the Magi will gain 5, and this creature will gain 1. Now it's on to their first Powers, Relics, and Spells phase, and they'll go ahead and play a relic that reduces all energized rates by 1. Now, is this a good idea? Probably not, because that will reduce their creature's energized rate down to 0. But at least blue will receive 1 less energy next turn during their energize. But now on to the attack step. So we'll have this 2 energy creature attack the 1 energy creature, so the 2 energy will go down to 1, and the other one will get discarded. Now the Magi is open again and only has 5 energy left, so Wudge will charge in and finish him off. And when a Magi is reduced to 0 energy and has 0 energy on the field, that Magi is defeated. It will get tossed over to the side and discard any of its in-play cards. Now, as long as a Magi is face down, there is nothing left to attack. So you can no longer attack because there are no targets, and you can't play cards that target Magi because those Magi don't exist yet. Now, another thing to note is that when a Magi is defeated, it discards all of its in-play cards. That means that if you played a card even on your opponent's side of the field, that card will get discarded, as long as you are the owner of that card. Now, if your opponent stole a card from you, then they are the owner of that card, so it won't get discarded. But there are some creatures, relics, and spells that you play on your opponent's side of the field, like attached to relics or things like that. And for those cards will get destroyed. But now it's blue's turn, and since they start their turn without a face-up Magi, the first thing they do is flip over the next one in the stack. They gain that Magi's starting energy and the starting cards, but this Magi says that when you reveal her, you gain control of all of your opponent's relics. So now, blue will immediately gain control of this purple relic. And like we just mentioned, if purple's Magi then gets defeated next turn, that relic no longer belongs to them, so it will not get discarded from play. But we go and grab our starting cards, and anytime that you search your deck or your discard pile for a card, you have to show your opponent what that card is, unless the effect specifically says otherwise, because you have to prove that you're not cheating and that you are in fact grabbing the correct card. But now it is blue's first Powers, Relics, and Spells phase, and blue does have a few spells that he could use. However, in this situation, it doesn't look like these spells will be of much benefit. So we're not going to play the spells. However, we will use the power on our relic to manipulate the top 2 cards of the deck. Then after that, we will move on to the attack phase, except we have no creatures in play, so we can't attack, and then on to the play creatures phase. And we're just going to lay them all down, since we have energy to spare. Now, one of these creatures, the Coral Hyron, says that whenever you play an Aroth spell, it gains 1 energy. So in that case, we are going to play this spell during the second Powers, Relics, and Spells phase. So first we reveal and declare that we are using this spell, we then pay for it off of our Magi, and then do what it says. This spell will cause both players to reveal their hand and discard any spells that they have. But since we played a spell, after its effect is resolved, it now gets discarded, and the Coral Hyron's effect will trigger. Since we played an Aroth spell, it will gain 1 energy. And forgive me for not playing things in the correct order, but you should definitely play energy on your creatures as you play them, one at a time. I'm just a little overwhelmed trying to play myself and think of what to say, and all of that other stuff. But with that, you just continue this pattern until one player loses all 3 of their Magi, therefore losing the game. But there are a few more things that we need to mention before wrapping up this video. If your deck has run out of cards, you can shuffle your discard pile back into your deck and continue drawing. But you can only do this during your draw step at the end of your turn. And you can only shuffle your discard pile during this phase if you need to keep drawing cards to fulfill your draw step. So if you have no cards in your deck, and you try to use a power that lets you draw a card, nothing happens. Because you can't draw any cards, and you can't shuffle your discard pile back into your deck, because it is not your draw phase. But during your draw phase, let's say you have 1 card left in your deck. So you draw that 1 card, but then when you go to draw your second card, there are no cards left. So at this point, you shuffle your discard pile back into your deck and continue drawing cards. Now, if you have fulfilled your draw requirement, but your deck is empty, like if you had 2 cards left in your deck and you drew those 2 cards but don't need to draw a third, you cannot shuffle your discard pile back into your deck. Some cards have the word starting printed at the bottom, and these are starting cards for the specified Magi. Like this says starting Warada. So Warada could use this card as a starting card. So she could start off with Essence of Narum, Arok, Chaos Gile, plus any card that says starting Warada. Now, these were just printed after the Magi is why they are listed differently. But also keep in mind that a Magi cannot start with more than 5 cards. Some cards have the word alternate printed directly below the name, and the word after alternate, for all intents and purposes, that is what the card actually is. So this Dark Twins card is not actually Dark Twins, it's Harada, because it says alternate Harada. So any card that mentions Harada is also mentioning the Dark Twins, because the Dark Twins is Harada. But that also means that in your Magi stack, you can't have Harada and the Dark Twins, because they are the same card. Same way with other cards, some creatures like Furoks have an alternate Furok. And so an alternate Furok is the same card as a Furok. So you couldn't have more than 3 copies of both of them combined in your deck, because you can't have more than 3 copies of any card, and for all intents and purposes, a Furok and an alternate Furok are the same card. However, any card that has Furok in the name doesn't mean that it's a Furok alternate. Like a baby Furok is its own unique card. It is different from a Furok and from an alternate Furok. But the alternate Furok counts as the regular single word Furok card. Last but not least, let's talk about regional penalties and regional restrictions. So there are 13 different colors that represent 13 different regions. Cards want to be played by a Magi that matches the region of the card. So here we have a called Magi, which is the Red Fire Nation. So the called Magi can play any called card without paying any additional fees. So if he played a red creature that cost 2, that creature just cost 2. But if he tries to play a card from a different region, like this creature that cost 2 but is from Nar, the Ice People, the Magi has to pay an additional fee of 1 as a regional penalty. So he'll have to pay 3 in order to play this 2-cost creature. But the creature still only receives 2 energy. It doesn't receive the regional penalty that was paid. So this one would cost 10, including the regional penalty. This one would cost 2, and this one would cost 11. So regardless of if it's a creature or a spell, the Magi has to pay a regional penalty of 1 to play cards from a different nation. Now, some cards are dual region. Like both of these Hirons say called/Narum. So they are both called and Narum creatures. It doesn't matter what color they are, it matters what's printed in the text. So even though this Hiron is a green card, it's still a called creature. It's a Narum and a called creature at the same time. So the called Magi would not have to pay a regional penalty in order to play that. But when it comes to relics, Magi cannot play relics from other nations. So a called Magi can only play called relics. One exception to all of these rules is the Golden Universal Region. The Universal Region can be played by any Magi without a regional penalty. So not only is any region allowed to play Universal Relics, but they can play any Universal cards without a regional penalty. Whereas this green Narum Relic could not be played by this called Magi. Magi can only play relics that are either universal or from the region in which they belong. Another unique twist is that the opposite of universal cards are these purple core cards. The core region is evil, so core cards cannot be played by non-core Magi, and vice versa. Core Magi cannot play any regional cards. So it doesn't matter if it's a creature or a spell or a relic, core cannot play anything else, and anything else cannot play core, unless the card specifically says that it can. Like this core card says that called Magi may play this card. So this called Magi could play this core card, but at a regional penalty of 1. So it would cost him 6 energy, 5 plus the regional penalty, and then this creature would come in with 5 energy. So there are exceptions to the rules, but they will be printed on the cards for you to read. Another unique thing about core is that some core Magi are shadow Magi. Like this card says it can be played by Narum Shadow Magi. So this card says it is a Narum Shadow Magi. Now this doesn't mean that it can play Narum cards. In fact, it can't. All of the same rules apply to this Shadow Magi as would apply to core Magi. It can only play cards that either specifically say that core Magi can play, or that specifically say that Narum Shadow Magi may play this card. And they still have to pay the regional penalty of 1 to play those cards. And that is all there is to it. I really hope that all of that made sense. Of course, if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments, and I will do my best to help you out. Now, if you're curious of what software I'm using to record and to play this game, I am using the Tabletop Simulator here on Steam. Simply go to the workshop, search up Magi-Nation, and then subscribe to this one right here. And you'll have access to all of the cards, including the erratas and all the other stuff. But of course, digital formats only go so far, and nothing beats the real-life game. So if you like the game, be sure to support it. It can't keep going without your help. So check out the Kickstarter, or buy some cards. The Arcanus Armory is a fantastic website that is still selling some of the old classic printings of the cards. So until the new printing of cards gets circulated at your local game store, you can always head over here to pick some up. And one of the coolest things they have is handmade, play-tested intro decks for new players. These are perfect for new players, and they're even selling them at a loss just to help get people interested in the game. Or if you have any questions about rulings, or want to look up deck ideas, or just talk to fellow Magi, head over to the Magi-Nation Discord. All in all, I hope you enjoy your experience in the Moonlands. Don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe, but above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye!